Hey, Asbury University. My name is Zach Monroe, and I am a counseling intern at the Center for Wholeness and Wellness, Asbury University Center for Wholeness and Wellness. And today I am going to be talking about the four pillars of mental health. And I'm not sure if you guys know this or not, but a few weeks back, we launched a YouTube channel, Asbury University Center for Wholeness and Wellness, and the goal of that is mental health media, and media that will assist you as students in your individual and communal flourishing. We want you all to know as students that we're here for you. And so one of the things that we're going to do is put out various types of content that we hope is useful and helpful to you all. That's very practical and can be applied to in daily life. And so one of the additions or playlists that we're going to do via YouTube is called Mental Health Matters. And I am doing a couple of different presentations in this edition. Two of my colleagues, Ben Clark, did one on exercise, and Hannah Callan did an excellent one on nutrition. And what we're trying to capture is the four pillars of mental health. And essentially what the four pillars of mental health are things that kind of tap into each domain, how we function as human beings, so bio, psychosocial, spiritual, and kind of highlight the importance of those. And so the four pillars of mental health are exercise, nutrition, relationships, and sleep. And those aren't in any hierarchy. They're all interdependently connected. And so how sleep is going is going to impact your relationships, and how nutrition is going to impact your exercise. And so if one or multiple areas are going well, then it's going to impact the others. And likewise, if it's not going so great, it will influence and impact the others. So I've been tasked with the goal of talking about relationships. And because relationships is such a broad category, friendships, girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, marriage, all sorts of different relationships. One of the things that I wanted to do was to provide content that was both broad and focused. So to do that, I decided to split it up into two. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to address two questions. But before we jump off to that, I want to provide a brief note just kind of on the idea of emotions in relationships. And I get this idea, this content from a book called The Cry of the Soul. Don't know if you guys can see that. It's by Dan Allender and Tripper Longman III. And essentially, this book is specifically addressing emotions, but relationships provide the context for us to maybe better understand our emotions. So this graph, this table is from that work, and I thought it provides a really helpful mental framework for us to understand what I'm going to be talking about today. So when you think about emotions, or when your emotions are provoked within relationships, there's several different responses that can take place between two or more people, right? And so one thing that you got to realize is within relationships is there's always relational movement. Even if there's no movement, that's considered movement. And so there are three different types of movement: attack, which means against a person; abandon, away from a person; or love, you're moving towards. But as many as you know, for counselors, the fight, flight, or freeze response is a big thing in our world. And so one of the things that we realized is within relationships is that the fight response can kind of look three different ways: anger, jealousy, and then even if you're moving towards someone, contempt. And so if you're triggered or you have a response and you want to fight, those are the three kind of ways that you can react. On the flip side of that, though, is a flight response, which for a movement against, it's kind of fear, like fear of being abandoned, or fear of how they're going to receive information, or fear of how someone you're in a relationship with might respond to you. Abandon, or moving away in terms of the relational movement, is despair. And so this idea of kind of thinking relationships, emotions, I don't know what to do, and then you kind of can fall into this idea of despair, and then also just shame. Like, am I enough? Um, is this going the way that it should be going? And so, all that to say, one of the things that I want you to realize as we unpack and address some of this content is that in relationships, there's always a relational movement. And oftentimes our emotions come out in fight or flight. And they can come out in freeze. We just kind of shut down. But the point being understanding that relationships are messy and they're difficult, and having these kind of categories can help you understand why you might be responding the way you are. So that's kind of setting a frame for, hey, just a quick word on emotions. And as we dive into the content, I think this will make a little bit more sense. And so what I wanted to do is, in these two videos, is the first video, the one that we're running today, is answer the question, what is involved in relationships? Now, I understand and realize there's all sorts of content, all sorts of different stuff out there for relationships, tons and tons of research, tons and tons of books. The point being, relationships are important, and just to help us conceptualize practically, I just thought of some things that might be helpful. And then the second question, the next video that's going to drop, is how do relationships evolve or how do they grow? So in order to answer our first question, I thought that I would talk about relational realities. And the reason I say relational realities is because oftentimes we do this thing in our heads where we kind of make things up, and or we run with ideas that may not actually be grounded in reality. And so one of the best ways to think about relationships is, what is the reality and what are some things that are going on in relationships? And so I think, to be broad yet focused, I thought about 4 different relational realities that are involved in every relationship: relational risks, relational ruptures, relational repairs, and relational renewals. And so how we're going to spend our time today is just unpacking each of those. And so first up, what is a relational risk? So the way that I define it is that it's an experience of vulnerability in connection with another human being. And so a risk is just a person being vulnerable with another human being. But what does this look like practically in the world? Okay. So it could be something as simple as a risk of inviting a new friend to hang out. A little bit bigger of a risk is maybe asking a boyfriend or a girlfriend out. Or maybe even a higher risk than that is allowing someone to assist you with a burden. So you saying, hey, I'm having a really hard time, I need some help. And so for me, just a practical example of this is kind of a low risk was one of my best friends. His name's Jalen, and we have mutual friends, and we ended up hanging out in the same circles. And I just took a risk and say, hey, do you want to go hang out, grab some coffee, get to know each other? And it was a risk. And the reason it was a risk was I wanted to get to know this guy because he seemed cool. And I risked him turning me down. He could have said, bro, I don't know you. Like, I've never met you. We've hung out a couple times. Or he could have said, yeah. And then when we hung out, like, be like, bro, you're weird. Like, I'm not hanging out with you. It was a risk, right? Now, thankfully, the risk that I took actually turned into, he's one of my best friends now. And so you can see that one reality within that's involved with relationships is risk. A bigger risk that I took was asking my wife to marry me. The risk was that she could have said no. Thankfully, she did it. And we've been married 11 years now. But that was a bigger risk. And so one of the things that we have to realize about relationships is that there are relational risks involved. And so one of the questions that we can ask in terms of assessment is, how are you doing with relational risks? I.e., for example, how are you doing with the experience of being vulnerable with the people that you're in a relationship with. Now, granted, to be vulnerable doesn't mean to share everything all the time, but based upon a level of safety that you have in relationships and a level of trust, um, what does vulnerability look like? And sometimes it's taking a risk of just trying to be more vulnerable. For some of us, we're too vulnerable. And so maybe pulling back a little bit. But wherever you might fall, one reality that's involved with relationship is relational risk. Now, with risks, there can be good consequences and there can be bad consequences, right? And so the second reality that's involved in relationships is relational ruptures. And in terms of the way that we can think about a rupture is think about a pipe bursting or an abrasion or a wound of the skin. You get a cut. There's this rupture. There's this tension, this difficulty, this conflict. There's a rupture. And these are situations or scenarios that cause tension or issues or conflict within a relationship. And so a small relational rupture might be just a miscommunication. As I was walking out the door, I said a snarky comment and I hurt someone. Rupture. To, hey, I got behind on a test and I cheated. I haven't cheated, just an example. But then you communicating to your professor, hey, I cheated. Rupture. Could be an intense moment on the basketball court, baseball field, lacrosse field, soccer field, cheerleading, and you don't hit your landing, or you go over on the baseball field, or you have a horrible shooting percentage, or you just are tired at your lacrosse game and you snap at one of your teammates. Rupture. Or something as serious as a betrayal. That's a bigger rupture. And so one of the things that we can think about in terms of relationships is that one of the realities that we have to deal with, that we have to understand that's involved, is relational ruptures. And so in terms of assessment, we can ask a couple of questions. We can ask, what relational ruptures are present in your life now? Like I can think of, I was short with one of my boys this morning, and I'm going to have to go back this afternoon, and I'm going to have to address that rupture. And speaking of addressing ruptures, another thing that we can ask is, how are relational ruptures dealt with in your family, in your life? Because that'll give you good insight to how you might experience and deal with ruptures in your own life. So we've got relational risks, we've got relational ruptures. Another reality that's involved in relationships is what I call relational repairs. In the same way, a relational rupture of the pipe bursting or someone getting a cut on their skin, a repair would be mending that pipe. So putting some sort of adhesive, some sort of controlling elbow around the pipe to where it's no longer burst, or sometimes even replacing it. Or, for example, you get a cut on your arm and it may just take a Band-Aid, or the cut may be so big that it has to take stitches and be healed. So relational repairs are movements towards fixing relational ruptures. So for instance, as I'm heading out the door, I say something snarky. My spouse hears it a particular way. In my mind, I was just joking. She hears it in a particular way that it was incredibly hurtful. I get a call, hey, you hurt my feelings. I'm really sorry. I did not mean for it to be heard that way. I can definitely see how it made you feel. Will you forgive me for having a higher level of snarkiness during this time? Or it could, a little bit bigger of a rupture in terms of repair, is betrayal. And so we see that a repair of a betrayal may take a mediation. It may take folks coming in, trusted folks coming in and giving insight and wisdom to the individuals who have both betrayed and then the person who has felt the effects of the betrayal. And then that repair may take a little bit more time because it's a little bit bigger of a situation. And so with that, you can think about in terms of assessment, growing up, how are relational ruptures handled? I can remember for the first time thinking, hey, how do we go about asking for forgiveness? Like, do we just slap a sorry on it? Or do we say, hey, I'm sorry for fill in the blank. Will you forgive me? And then, hey, we got to give me some space and some grace to grow in this particular area. And you take ruptures a little bit more seriously. But understanding how ruptures were dealt with growing up, again, will give you some insight in terms of if you feel offended, do you attack, do you fight, or do you flee, do you run away, or do you freeze and shut down? Because that'll give you some understanding of why you do what you do, and then kind of frame it in a way to where, hey, is this healthy? Is this the way that I want to do it, or do I need to give some thought to this? And so we've got risks, ruptures, repairs, and then lastly, we've got what I call relational renewals. And the best way to think about this in terms of a definition is think about your yearly medical checkup. Relational renewals are times where you kind of check in with those you're in a relationship with. And a good example of this kind of is just you ask your friend, hey, how are we doing as friends? Are there things that I'm doing that's annoying to you? Are there things that I've done that have hurt you in the past that we need to address? It's a check-in. And so for me, I'll never forget this. It was a really big deal. I was getting ready to graduate from a particular institution, and a buddy of mine was leaving. He was going to be a pastor down in Florida, and to make sure that we stayed in good communication, I just did a check-in. Said, "Hey, man, I know you're taking a pastorate down there. What does it look like for us to stay in good communication? And what does it look like for me to be a good friend to you during this time?" And I wasn't going to be able to talk to him every week, and I made that known, but we were kind of able to establish, hey, this is how we're going to do things. Another example of this is one of my best friends. Sounds so stupid, it's so silly, but my birthday was coming up, and he got me a gift, and it was totally lame, and I felt like, bro, we've been friends for almost 8 years now. How in the world? And it really bothered me. And I felt like, man, why am I getting so irritated about this? And so I had to do a check-in and say, hey, man, what's going on? Like, how are we doing? I'm hurt and irritated. And he was able to kind of poke fun at me and say, bro, just relax. Like, I'm getting you a more serious gift. Well, because we were able to check in, we grew as friends. And so in terms of assessment, one of the things that you can do is just ask yourself, how are the relationships going in your life? And for those individuals who maybe have a high priority or maybe some access, higher levels of access to you and vice versa, maybe ask them the question, do we need to check in? And if so, what could a check-in look like? And it could be as simple as, hey, I just wanted to check in and make sure that you still feel cared for and that I'm in your corner. Do you? And then you just kind of give some space. Or it could be, we had an awkward, interaction a couple weeks ago, and I just want to touch base and make sure that the air is clear and we're on the same page. And so what you'll see is that in terms of the question, what is involved, just 4 things. And there's lots more, but in terms of just kind of boiling it down and trying to make it practical, relationships involve risk, they involve ruptures, they involve repairs, and they involve renewals. And so these kind of 4 R's have helped me personally kind of think through not only the importance of relationships, but then practically how do you engage and what are some of the processes involved in maintaining good relationships. And so again, you see risks, ruptures, repairs, and renewals. And so today, again, one of the things that we're doing is mental health media. and that's a typo, should say mental health matters. But again, research is clear, relationships are important, and my hope today was to provide you some really practical content of kind of conceptualizing the different processes or mechanisms that can take place within relationships in an effort to assist you in flourishing, both individually as well as within the relationships you have. And so I hope this content was helpful, and I will see you shortly. I'll be putting out another video, Relationships Part 2, answering the second question, how do relationships evolve? So if you can, check it out, like it, subscribe, send it to all your classmates, all your teammates, get the word out. The Center for Wholeness and Wellness is trying to push some mental health media that will assist you in your individual and communal flourishing. Thanks for tuning in.